This is 10 Questions. I'm Andy Johnson. Mr. Brian Glynn is a managing director for the Americas at the European Union. He paid a visit to Trinidad and Tobago recently before going on to Barbados and St. Lucia for discussions with government officials here and there on the substance of a program of international assistance called the Global Gateway. The program offers unparalleled assistance in a wide range of areas, including transportation, clean energy, infrastructure development, digitalization, agricultural development, and more. Mr. Glynn is my guest on this edition of the program. He's speaking with us from his base in Brussels, Belgium. How does he sum up these visits? What prospects does he see coming from it? Good to have you, sir. Good to see you again.
Hello, good morning in your time, good afternoon in our time, and very nice to speak to you again. It's been a few weeks now since my visit to Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados and St. Lucia, and I think as I explained when I was there, the pandemic has meant that we haven't had as many of the kind of high-level visits we would like from the European Union to the Caribbean. And I went there with my colleague from our international cooperation, our international partnerships Directorate General, basically with two messages. First of all, on the political side, the political relationship between the European Union and the Caribbean matters. We recognize that we haven't been able to work on that political level as much as we would have liked, and we hope to change that. And on the cooperation side, things have also changed in that most of the countries in the region, and this is especially true for the small island states in the Caribbean, no longer have a national cooperation envelope, but there is a regional envelope for all of the Caribbean from 2021 to 2027 of about 800 million euro. And the priorities for that 800 million euro are very much the priorities that have been identified by the countries in the region, which are also our priorities. We call it the Green Deal, which is essentially the transformation of our economies and societies to a more ecological way of living, and also the digital transformation. And as part of that, Global Gateway comes into the frame, and Global Gateway is separate from the 800 million euro. There's an overall package for the whole world, which could be worth up to 300 billion euro. And what is Global Gateway? Well, Global Gateway is our response as the European Union to the requests that have come into us from partners across the world on providing financing, assistance, technical expertise in the area of transformation of infrastructure. Infrastructure in the past we all understood as being bridges and ports and roads and railways. The infrastructure of the future, quite a lot of it is stuff that we can't see. Some of that infrastructure is around electricity grids as we move to a more green way of developing electricity. And it's also the transformation on the digital side, particularly linking up Latin America with Europe on the internet and the fiber optic cable side of things.
Yeah, it's good that you mentioned electricity, because I'm not sure whether you know, a couple of weeks ago we had a major outage here that went for more than 10 hours, and we have an inquiry going on into that. What caused that and why?
Yeah, and you know these kind of events, I think, are becoming more frequent across the world, and part of the effort to ensure that we green our energy matrix is also trying to ensure that we have a reliable and sustainable energy matrix for the future. Trinidad and Tobago is blessed, as you know well, with hydrocarbons, and has been able over many years to benefit from that. But in our meetings with the government, there was also a recognition that the world is changing, and that we all need now to be thinking of a world in which we rely less and less on hydrocarbons and more on renewable energy resources. Those new renewable energy resources, some of them will require massive investment, and our Global Gateway is intended to look at projects that come from the region, ideally on a regional basis. We probably won't have the bandwidth for doing things that are just one country, because this 300 billion euro, it sounds like a lot of money, but when you divide it across the world and all of the needs in this period of transformation, it's not going to be enough. So we're very much focusing on flagship projects that come to us from the region. And the good news is for the Caribbean is that there's quite a lot of regional integration at the political level. And what we would need is for the political leaders in the region to come together and offer us proposals in the European Union for high-level projects that might be funded under the Global Gateway.
All right, so based on these meetings in Port of Spain and then in Bridgetown and in Castries, what have you taken back to Brussels with you as to what are the next steps? How do these countries sort of access projects under this Global Gateway?
Well, I mean, there are a number of next steps. First of all, the message that we received very clearly is that while the political leaders were very glad to meet people at my level, at senior official level, they need to meet with our political leaders. And we've very much taken that back to our political leadership in Brussels. And we're hoping that in the course of this year, we will be able to organise some kind of a high-level meeting where the High Representative, my boss, on the foreign policy side, and the Commissioner for International Partnerships will be able to meet with the political leaders in the region. What we've said to all of our partners, not just in Trinidad and Tobago and Barbados, and bilaterally with St. Lucia, but also to the Organisation of East Caribbean States, is that we want to hear from them. So the ball is in the court of the countries in the region. If there are particular projects in the infrastructure area that we want to hear from them, and our delegation in Bridgetown is the one that has responsibility for cooperation for most of the region. So they'll be cooperating, working very closely with the governments in the region as well to look and see what kind of projects there are, and they will be brought back to Brussels and they'll be examined. And in the course of this year, we would hope to have announcements made on some of the projects that we would fund. One thing I'd anticipate as part of this is we already have an announcement of an EU, Latin American, Caribbean digital alliance. And that digital alliance is essentially our offer to the countries of the region on digital transformation. It has to be populated, yes. At the moment, it's a political idea, which means that we share the same goals of ensuring a speedy transition to a digitally connected Latin America and the Caribbean in its relationship with the European Union. In the course of this year, we will be populating that with content. And part of that will involve more visits of the kind that we made to the Caribbean, to other countries in the region.
Yeah, I got the sense that you all were particularly energized by the fact that in Trinidad and Tobago, the Prime Minister of the country attended one of your sessions.
Look, we were very honoured to have a direct meeting with not just the Prime Minister, but some of the senior ministers in the government. And it was probably the first time there had been an opportunity to have that kind of bilateral meeting between the European Union and the government of Trinidad and Tobago. The Prime Minister delivered a very positive message that the government of Trinidad and Tobago was interested in a deeper relationship with the European Union, and that some of the challenges, the global challenges that we discussed, particularly on the green and digital transformation, that the European Union was a strong partner, not just for Trinidad and Tobago, but for all of the countries in the region. We also had a discussion on some of the irritants in the relationship. As you know, some of the countries in the region have found themselves on listings from the European Union, whether it's on tax practices or on anti-money laundering issues. And the commitment from the Prime Minister was very strong on this, that as far as Trinidad and Tobago was concerned and the government was concerned, they want to come into compliance as quickly as possible. So we delivered that very positive message back to Brussels as well.
So what about that same situation in the rest of the Caribbean, as far as you could have told from the meetings in Bridgetown and Castries? Because, you know, as you say, what they call it here, the blacklist, and that is for sort of uninitiated minds and ears, it comes across as a real sort of stickler something that is an irritant in the relationships between these countries in this part of the world and the EU?
Yeah, look, on these listings, we would prefer that all of the countries in the region were in compliance. And we know that the handling of this could have been done more sensitively from our part. But I think in response to some of the feedback that we've got from the countries in the region, we're looking at the way that we engage with the countries in the region differently. So, rather than having an announcement that countries are on X or Y list, we're in contact with them pretty much constantly throughout the year. And in the case of Trinidad and Tobago in particular, the then Attorney General highlighted to us that his office had been already in very close contact with the officials in Brussels, and that they were working together to move off these lists. So this is what our offer was as well to the other countries, that yes, we know it's an irritant, but there is help available, there's technical assistance, and that the officials in Brussels are they're working on the basis that they would prefer that there were no countries on these lists, and that any assistance that can be provided, we would do that. So the model of Trinidad and Tobago's approach is one that would probably work very well for the other countries too.
All right, so in my newspaper reporting on this initiative, I've described it as the EU's way of competing with the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. Can you speak to that? To what extent that may be on target or not on target?
The one good thing, I suppose, about the multipolar world is that countries that are still developing have opportunities. They have choices from some of the larger players on the world scene on how they do their development and how they access funds for particular cherished national projects. And what I said to partners in the region about our particular approach was that no country ever got into unsustainable debt on the basis of cooperation programs with the European Union. That may not be the case with other actors. And it's true that in some cases, the offer on the other side might be quicker and there might be less strings attached to it. But the way that we do development, the way that we do partnership, our systems are perhaps more complex, but we feel that they're more sustainable in most cases. And we would never tell any government that you should only choose financing from a particular source, but governments were saying to us, well, there is this project available, a project financing available from elsewhere. What's your offer? So I suppose rather than being a response to the Belt and Road, it made us think about what we were doing ourselves and how we package it. And Global Gateway is very much about that. And the way that once you get into the detail of it, particularly in the kind of concessional financing that would be offered under Global Gateway, pooling all of the resources we have in the European Union. So a small amount of it would be from this regional envelope I mentioned, the 800 million, a very small amount of it. You would also pool resources from the interested member states of the European Union and resources from the European financial institutions. So we were looking at, where we had assets, where we had funding, financing, and tried to pool them together in a way that would be a bit more attractive to our partner countries. And we think that once people find out more about Global Gateway, there will be a big uptake in the kind of partnership approach that we're offering in this area. But countries are free to choose whichever development model they wish. I would say that Global Gateway is also something that is based on values. We have values in the European Union that we share with partners in Latin America and the Caribbean. There is now a push on the part of some other partners to suggest that there is a different type of approach to democracy that offers quicker results for developing countries. We don't share that opinion. We believe that the kind of democratic values that underpin our societies are not negotiable, and having free societies is a fundamental basis for development that is sustainable sustainable in the long run. So we're hopeful that Global Gateway, once it gets rolled out and there's a greater understanding of what's involved in it, will become very useful and beneficial to countries in the region.
All right, we're going to take a break and we come back in a moment. Stay with us. Mr. Brian Gill, the Managing Director for the Americas at the European Union, talking about an initiative of international assistance from the EU called the Global Gateway. We'll be back in a moment.
Burning questions, urgent topics. Welcome back to One on One, the show where we tackle the most current and pertinent subjects that are affecting all citizens, where we ask the hard questions and have in-depth conversations. What separates One on One from other talk shows is that the conversation stems from a younger perspective on topics that affect the fabric of our society. One on One, Wednesdays at 10 a.m. on WESN Content Capital.
In this season, we talk more about health, wellness, and everything in between. I am so excited to share with you everything about health and wellness so that you can design the life that you've always dreamed of. Join me here on What's Up Doc.
What's Up Doc? Tuesdays and Thursdays here on WESN Content Capital.
All right, welcome back to the program. This is 10 Questions. My guest is Mr. Brian Glynn, the Managing Director for the Americas at the EU in Brussels, talking about a program of assistance called the Global Gateway. It's worth billions of euros. Well, let's come back in, Mr. Glynn, on the question of you talked earlier about political matters. What would some of them be between the EU and countries in the Caribbean, in this region? What would some of those major political matters be?
Well, look, since my visit to the Caribbean, rather unfortunately, Europe is at war. The European Union is not at war with anyone, but unfortunately, Ukraine has been invaded by its neighbor, Russia. And this invasion is an example of naked aggression of a type that any small country, and I come from a small country as well, Ireland, any small country that has a large neighbor must look at what is happening in Ukraine and shudder to think that there might be a possibility of a frightening new world in which large countries which decide that their neighbors no longer have the same right to exist as they did before will simply invade them on spurious context. And this is what unfortunately has happened in the case of the invasion of Ukraine by its neighbor Russia. This has become the number one issue in the European Union. It's an existentialist issue for us. Because we cannot accept that on the continent of Europe that such a rule of the jungle would apply. And one of the big advantages of the partnership that we have with countries in the region is that we were able to contact countries in the region and ask for their support. And we're conscious that we often go to countries in the region and ask for their support. And we know that because of this egregious attack on the part of Russia, the attack on its neighbor, we knew that we could count on the support of countries in the region. So there was massive support from the countries of the Caribbean in particular and across Latin America when it came to the United Nations. We very much appreciate that support. It's not something that we take for granted, and we know that there will be consequences as a result of this war that will affect countries in the region. And we're particularly conscious of the economic effects. The European Union has adopted a package of massive sanctions that are aimed simply to turn off the financial tap to Russia to stop it being able to conduct war in the manner that it has. We are conscious that these sanctions will have consequences for flows of international trade. We're conscious that equally the overall global economy may suffer as a result. We want to pass a message to the countries in the region that we are aware that these consequences may take place. We ask the governments of the countries in the region to be in contact with our delegations in the region, in Trinidad and Tobago and in Barbados, to let us know if there are consequences, immediate consequences that you are facing, and we will examine them and look at see what actions we can take. This, unfortunately, this political problem is one that has removed some of the space that might be available for the kind of high-level political engagement that I was talking about at the start, that we want to see reintroduced as part of our relationship with America, with Latin America and the Caribbean. But aside from what's happening in Europe at the moment, we still see this as the start of a positive period. In 2022 and 2023, we in the European Union will be working to have to come back to a scenario where we can have bi-regional summits like we used to have with all of the countries of Latin America and the Caribbean. We already had a leaders meeting in December, a virtual leaders meeting in which some of the countries that are representing presidencies of organizations like CARICOM and CARIFORUM were invited to the meeting. Trinidad and Tobago and Antigua and Barbuda were invited from the Caribbean. This is a stopgap measure. It was our way of saying that we know that we haven't had the full bi-regional summit in a long time. It's not possible to do it at this particular moment, but we hope in the course of the next 2 years to work towards those kind of bi-regional summits again. So there's really quite a lot on our plate at the moment. As you can imagine, the war in Ukraine is occupying quite a lot of the political time in Europe, but it's not a time for us to forget about our relationship with Latin America and the Caribbean. I would say quite the opposite. In times like this, you know who your friends are. And in this case, it's important for us, those who have provided more to us, we should do more with them.
Right.
So I certainly, at my level, will be trying to do as much as I can to ensure that this political relationship that I was talking about can be put back on track again.
Right, and forgive me for appearing to want to make these comparisons, but I'm thinking about, I think it said that there's an advantage in the global gateway that is not there in the Belt and Road, in that the narrative around many countries in different parts of the developing world are that so they get into these arrangements, they have gotten into these arrangements with the Chinese, and when they can't meet the end of the bargain, the Chinese just come in and take over whatever the assets are that they're working with. That is not going to be the case in any of these initiatives under the global gateway, right?
That's correct. And as I said, nobody has ever got into massive debt as a result of European Union cooperation programs. So the reason that we take longer to do these kind of projects is that our intention is that the countries concerned benefit from them at the most concessional rate possible over a prolonged period of time. And our investment bank, for example, the European Investment Bank, has had a very long relationship in Latin America and the Caribbean, and they're looking for more opportunities to invest in the region. And precisely because of the very beneficial arrangements that they come to with countries, the bank has had a very successful relationship in the region. And I'd remind you, our bank, our European Investment Bank, is a not-for-profit bank. But they've assured me that all of the loans that they have in Latin America, the countries in the region always come up with the payments as well, and that's an indication that these are not onerous conditions that are attached to them, and that's a fundamental value for us.
Yeah, and some other values we talk about when reading through the documents: transparency and accountability, democracy, and freedoms of the various sorts. And these things are critical to the relationships that are going to be enhanced with these arrangements.
They're critical, and again, for us, having free societies that are based on competitive democratic elections. This is an essential part of who we are as a people in Europe, and it's also an essential part of who you are in the Caribbean and in Latin America. So when there are difficulties on the democratic side, as is the case with your neighbour in Venezuela, our effort is to try to move those countries back towards the kind of values that are long-standing. And it's simply because not only do we believe that this is the best approach for societies to take, it's also the basis on which all of the countries in the region have operated over a long period of time, and we think that it's the best way. And the Chinese model or the Russian model, which are currently being offered perhaps as an alternative to this, we do not think that these models on the democratic side have anything to offer to the countries of Latin America and the Caribbean. And we'll be very open about that. Democracy is not something that we're shy about, and it's something that underpins relationships that have gone back for decades. In the case of Trinidad and Tobago, we've been there for 45 years, and we're not going anywhere. Even though countries in the region may have graduated to a higher level of development, we have a different kind of cooperation program to reflect that, and it is based on shared values.
What about, which to some extent to some people was sort of historic, the fact that the EU had taken a position early o'clock when the disputes in Venezuela on governance were at its height at their heights about two years ago. What we witnessed in the last couple of days was that there was a delegation from the US which held talks with Mr. Maduro and his team. And I'm told in talking with the Charge d'Affaires in Port of Spain a couple of days ago via these facilities, he said that he was very strict in saying that those talks had only to do with the United States' attempts to free a number of US citizens who were being held against their will and illegally in Venezuela. But it raised the question about whether there's been any kind of thaw in relations between the both countries. The EU was out front in saying, a number of countries in the EU were out front in saying that they didn't support what was happening in Venezuela 2 years ago, and they're out, and they had, you all had said that you sort of gave your nod to the man who was challenging for the presidency. What's the situation now between the EU and Caracas?
Well, we had a good discussion about Venezuela with Prime Minister Rowley, and Trinidad and Tobago, of course, being closest neighbour of Venezuela, has seen some of the negative consequences of what happens when a society goes down a particular route. As we know, over 5 million people have left Venezuela in the last few years, and the refugee crisis in the region is something that we are, of course, now experiencing in Europe as a result of the war in Ukraine. Going back to the question of democratic values, we have no interest in punishing Venezuela or the people of Venezuela. All we are simply trying to do is to ensure that the people of Venezuela get the opportunity to vote in free and fair elections, which was not the case during the last presidential election. And in the European Union, rather than simply sitting and pointing out the deficiencies in the Venezuelan system, we have been taking action. So in order to try to improve the position for the conduct of elections in Venezuela, we sent an election observation mission to the recent gubernatorial and municipal elections that took place in Venezuela. And we did this in cooperation with the Electoral Council, National Electoral Council in Venezuela. And that process was a difficult one, as you can imagine, because there are still lots of tensions in Venezuela when it comes to elections. But those elections took place in circumstances that at least were better than those that existed during the presidential election a few years previously. And the outcome of that electoral observation mission was that the opposition were at least allowed to have an opportunity to run in elections on a reasonable basis. We have made recommendations as a result of that electoral observation mission, and we hope that the recommendations from that mission will provide a strong basis for presidential elections to take place in Venezuela under better conditions they did the last time. If that happens, And the solution to the problem in Venezuela cannot be imposed from outside. If the Venezuelan people, through their representatives, can come to an agreement, an arrangement that the next presidential elections will take place under better conditions. And in parallel to that, we have the negotiations process that's taking place in Mexico delivering fruit. We think that we will be in a much better place to have a better relationship with Venezuela. And whoever wins the election in 2024, it's of no concern to us who wins a free and fair election. We will always work with governments that win such elections. Whoever wins that election, we hope will be in a good position to start a new path for Venezuela, one that's based on undoing some of the damage of the last few years and getting Venezuela back on a path towards sustainable development.
Brian Glynn, Managing Director of the Americas at the European Union. Thanks very much for talking with us here on 10 Questions.
Thank you.
Very welcome. Well, that's our program for this week. I'm Andy Johnson. We'll see you next time.